Welcome to this deep dive into the New York Times Connections game. It's number 560 for December 22nd, 2024. We've got a stack of stuff. We've got articles. We got hints. We even have a YouTube video from August of somebody playing. Talk about dedication. This one's been generating some buzz, and we're here to kind of break it down. Are you ready to see why some people found this one trickier than the bot's 3.5 out of 5 difficulty rating?
You know what's interesting about this game is that it seems to play on this intersection of common knowledge and niche expertise. Some categories may feel like a walk in the park, while others could leave you scratching your head, even if you're like a seasoned connections player.
Okay, let's jump right in. The yellow category, slang for head. This one had folks talking. Coconut, crown, dome, and skull. One source even admitted to being totally stumped by coconut as slang for head. It makes you wonder how much of solving these puzzles depends on like your age, where you grew up, all that stuff.
Right. Absolutely. It's like the game is highlighting those subtle linguistic differences that we often take for granted. Coconut to mean head might be common in some circles, but completely foreign to others. It's a reminder that even in a language we think we know so well, there's always these little pockets of regional or generational variation.
Totally. And that's what makes it so fun, right? You never know what's going to trip you up. Now, the green category was palindromes. ABBA, kayak, nun, and stats. Some people thought it was a bit too easy a giveaway even.
But here's the thing. Even though it might seem obvious to experienced players, palindromes appearing as a standalone category has been a recurring theme in past games. So for those who've been playing for a while, recognizing this pattern can actually be a strategic advantage. It's almost like the game is rewarding those who are paying attention to its history and trends.
Oh, that's a really good point. It's not just about knowing the words. It's about understanding the game itself, its little quirks and patterns. Now, the blue category was police procedurals, which honestly is right up my alley. Bones, Elementary, Kojak, and Monk all made the list. I can see how this one might favor people of a certain age, right?
Absolutely. The source even mentioned that some players might not be familiar with all these shows because they span different decades. This raises an interesting question about how our cultural background and the era we grew up in influence our ability to solve these puzzles. If you're a big fan of crime dramas, this category might be a slam dunk. But if you're less familiar with the genre, it can pose a real challenge.
Okay, on to purple, the trickiest category. First in comedy duo. This one felt like a real blast from the past with names like Abbott, Fry, Key, and Laurel. We're talking Abbott and Costello Fry and Laurie Key and Peel and Laurel and Hardy, a pretty wide generational span there.
Yeah, it's a clever category because it requires you to not only recognize the individual names, but also to recall their comedic partners, which might span different eras of comedy. Imagine being someone who's never even heard of Fry and Laurie as a duo. It highlights how much of our knowledge base is shaped by our age and exposure to different forms of entertainment.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the idea that some games might cater to a particular generation more than others? I mean, this one did have a few references that might resonate more with an older audience.
It's a valid observation. While the game aims for a broad appeal, it's inevitable that certain themes and references will resonate more strongly with players who have a particular cultural background or lived through a specific era. It's almost like the game is inadvertently holding a mirror up to our collective cultural memory, revealing those shared experiences that bind us as a generation.
I love that. A mirror to our collective cultural memory. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about player reactions and strategies. There's this hilarious anecdote about a YouTube player from August who solves the puzzle in a totally random order. I mean, they were jumping all over the board, and somehow they still got it right.
It's fascinating how different people approach these puzzles. Some might have a systematic method carefully analyzing each word before making a connection, while others might rely more on intuition and leaps of logic. This particular player's success, despite their seemingly chaotic approach, suggests that there isn't necessarily a right way to solve a connections puzzle. It's more about finding what works for you, trusting your instincts, and maybe even embracing a bit of randomness.
Yeah. It's all about finding your own rhythm, your own way of seeing those connections. And speaking of different approaches, there's been quite a debate about the difficulty level of this game. The bot rated it as 3.5 out of 5, but player reactions were all over the map. Some found it easy, others found it surprisingly challenging.
This speaks to the subjective nature of difficulty. What might seem straightforward to one person could be a head-scratcher for another, depending on their individual knowledge base, comfort with wordplay, and even their mood on a given day.
It's like our brains are wired to see certain patterns more easily than others. Maybe you're a whiz at spotting palindromes, but struggle with pop culture references, or vice versa. It's a fascinating glimpse into how our minds work, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it reinforces the idea that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to these games. Each puzzle is a unique challenge that requires us to tap into different cognitive skills and knowledge domains.
It really makes you appreciate the complexity of something as simple as a word game. Now, before we dive into some of the expert advice and strategies that came up in our research, I want to hear your thoughts. Was there anything about this particular game that surprised you? A category that stumped you? Or maybe a word that just seemed out of place?
For me, it was the slang for head category that really caught my attention. It's not every day you see words like coconut, crown, dome, and skull grouped together. It got me thinking about how slang evolves and how certain terms can feel so specific to a particular time or place.
Right. It's almost like a secret language, a way of signaling that you belong to a certain group or generation.
Yeah.
And it can be fascinating to see how those terms spread and change over time. What might have been cutting-edge slang in the past could sound completely outdated today.
Precisely. And that's what makes this category so intriguing. It's a reminder that language is constantly in flux, adapting to new trends, technologies, and social norms. Imagine trying to explain a word like yeet to someone who grew up in the 1950s.
Oh, that's hilarious. It would be like trying to explain the internet to someone who's only ever used a rotary phone. Speaking of which, remember how we talked about the blue category police procedurals and how it might favor people of a certain age? Well, this got me thinking about how a connections puzzle from, say, 50 years ago would look completely different.
Oh, absolutely. The categories would likely reflect the pop culture slang and current events of that era. You could have a category like 1970s disco hits or Watergate scandal figures. Imagine trying to decipher those connections without the benefit of hindsight.
It would be like stepping into a time capsule. It makes you realize how much our understanding of the world is shaped by the time period we live in. And it also highlights how much language evolves over time, shedding old words and adopting new ones as our experiences and interests shift.
It's a testament to the dynamism of language, how it constantly adapts to reflect the changing world around us. And playing connections is like getting a snapshot of that evolution in action. It's a reminder that language is not static, but a living, breathing entity that's constantly in motion.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Now back to the game at hand. One thing that struck me was the debate around its difficulty level. The bot rated it as 3.5 out of 5. But player reactions were all over the map. Some found it easy, others found it surprisingly tricky. Why do you think that is?
I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier about the subjectivity of difficulty. Each player brings their own unique set of knowledge, experiences, and cognitive strengths to the game. Someone who's a voracious reader and word enthusiast might find the puzzle a breeze, while someone who's less comfortable with wordplay might find it more challenging.
Right. And it's not just about vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's also about recognizing patterns, making connections, and maybe even taking a few educated guesses along the way.
Exactly. It's a combination of knowledge, intuition, and strategic thinking. And sometimes it's about trusting your gut and not overthinking things. Remember the YouTube player who solved the puzzle in a seemingly random order? That's a perfect example of how intuition can sometimes trump a more methodical approach.
Totally. It's like sometimes you just have to let your brain make those leaps of logic without getting bogged down in the details. But let's be real. There are also times when overthinking is inevitable, especially when you're stuck on a particularly tricky category.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there staring at those words, trying to force a connection that just isn't there. And that's where Winalie's advice comes in.
You're talking about her tip to hold off on guessing until you're absolutely sure about a category. That's a great strategy, especially when you consider how cleverly these puzzles are constructed. Sometimes a word might seem to fit into multiple categories, and rushing to a guess can cost you precious turns.
Yeah, it's like a game of mental chess. You have to think several steps ahead, considering all the possibilities before making your move. And that's where patience and a bit of strategic thinking can really pay off.
It's like you have to be both a wordsmith and a strategist
Mm.
to really conquer connections.
Yeah.
But beyond the puzzle itself, one of the things that fascinates me is how much people love sharing their connections experiences. You see it everywhere, online forums, social media, people dissecting the categories, celebrating their wins, and commiserating over those frustrating near misses.
It speaks to the social element of the game, right? It's not just about solving the puzzle in isolation. It's about connecting with others who share that same passion for wordplay and mental challenge. It's almost like a virtual community built around a shared love of language.
And let's be honest, there's a little bit of friendly competition involved, right? Everyone wants to brag about their perfect score or their longest streak. It's all part of the fun.
Of course. It adds a layer of excitement and motivation. It's that drive to improve, to test ourselves against others, and to see how our knowledge and skills stack up.
Exactly. And it's not just about winning or losing. It's about the thrill of the challenge, the satisfaction of cracking a tough category, and the shared experience of puzzling over those tricky connections.
I think it also taps into our innate curiosity about language and how it works. These games force us to think about words in new ways, to see connections we might have otherwise missed. It's like a workout for our brains, strengthening our cognitive muscles and expanding our understanding of the world.
Yeah. It's like connections is training us to be more observant, more aware of the subtle nuances of language, and the hidden patterns that connect seemingly disparate ideas. And who knows, maybe those skills can even translate to other areas of our lives, like problem-solving, critical thinking, or even just having more interesting conversations.
It's certainly possible. After all, these games engage multiple cognitive processes, from memory recall to pattern recognition to creative problem solving. And by regularly challenging ourselves with these types of puzzles, we might be inadvertently sharpening our mental agility and expanding our cognitive toolkit.
I love that. A cognitive toolkit. It's like connections is giving us a set of mental tools that we can then apply to other areas of our lives. And speaking of tools, Why to Lose advice about avoiding rage solving is a gem. We've all been there, right? That moment when frustration takes over and we start making random guesses out of sheer desperation.
Right. It's a classic example of how our emotions can sometimes hijack our decision-making. When we're under pressure, especially in a competitive setting, our rational thinking can go out the window. And in the context of connections, rage-solving rarely leads to a successful outcome. It's more likely to result in wasted guesses and a lower score.
Yeah. It's like a reminder to take a step back, breathe, and try to approach the puzzle with a clear head. Sometimes the best strategy is to simply walk away for a bit and come back to it with fresh eyes.
Absolutely. A fresh perspective can make all the difference. And sometimes letting go of that need to solve the puzzle immediately can actually lead to a more insightful and satisfying solution in the long run.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into connections, I think the key takeaway is that it's more than just a game. It's a reflection of how we think, how we connect with others, and how we engage with the ever-living world of language.
It's a microcosm of the human experience distilled into 16 words and 4 categories. It challenges us, entertains us, and connects us in ways we might never have imagined.
And who knows, maybe it's even training us to be better thinkers, more creative problem solvers, and more attuned to the subtle connections that weave the fabric of our lives.
So the next time you find yourself facing a connections puzzle, remember that it's more than just a game. It's an opportunity to explore the fascinating world of language challenge your assumptions and connect with others who share your love of wordplay and mental stimulation.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore the fascinating world of connections. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic. Ready to uncover more hidden gems of knowledge and spark your curiosity?